back in the plush chair, his sharp gaze fixed on 𝐁𝐬𝐭, who sat across from him. Does she even know you are marrying her off to me? Taehyung's voice was low, laced with a mix of disbelief and mockery. 𝐁𝐬𝐭 exhaled deeply, running a hand through his hair. No, she doesn't, he admitted. She's already locked herself in her room and hasn't touched a bite of food since 3 days. If she finds out you are the groom, she'll lose it completely. Taehyung smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. So much hostility. The girl practically breathes fire whenever she sees me, he remarked, swirling the drink in his hand. And here I am agreeing to this circus only because of Aussie and you. 𝐁𝐬𝐭's lips curved into a faint, understanding smile. Why is a sweet girl, Taehyung? She's just bitter because of some things that happened to her. Don't let her attitude fool you. Before Taehyung could respond, the door slammed open with a bang, making both men jolt. One stormed in, her face red with fury, her chest heaving as she yelled blindly at 𝐁𝐬𝐭. How dare you, she screamed, stomping toward her brother, oblivious to Taehyung's presence. How dare you fix my marriage with him of all the people, that monkey. 𝐁𝐬𝐭 opened his mouth to respond, but Wang grabbed him by the collar, shaking him violently as tears brimmed in her eyes. Do you have any idea how much I hate him? I'll kill him before I marry him, or I'll kill myself. How could you do this to me, 𝐁𝐬𝐭? Calm down, Wang. 𝐁𝐬𝐭 said, his voice firm yet pleading, but she was inconsolable, sobbing and accusing him relentlessly. Shut up, just shut up. I became a burden to you. You couldn't find any good way to get rid of me. How could you just hand me over to that monster, evil best friend of yours? He stood, but she shoved him away with a sharp push, turning to storm out of the room. Instead, she collided with something solid, or rather someone. Her wide, tearful eyes shot up to meet Taehyung's calm yet sharp gaze. The color drained from her face. You? She whispered, frozen in shock. Taehyung raised an eyebrow, crossing his arm casually. Monkey, monster, evil. He mocked, his voice dripping with amusement. Wang's face turned crimson and she immediately turned back to 𝐁𝐬𝐭 with a desperate look. But her brother merely stood, stepping forward and brushing himself off as though nothing had happened. Well, looks like you are in good hands, 𝐁𝐬𝐭 said casually, ignoring her protest as he moved towards the door. I'll leave her to you, Taehyung. She's all yours. No one can handle her better than you. 𝐁𝐬𝐭, you can't just leave me with him. Taehyung grabbed her arm. My wife's calling me, 𝐁𝐬𝐭 said with a shrug, glancing at Taehyung. Make sure you take care of my sister. Taehyung then glanced at Wang. And don't worry, I'll handle this. 𝐁𝐬𝐭, you bastard, I'll never forgive you. You always wag your tail behind us, Taehyung. I'll tell Aussie you met Maria. I'll make sure your wife throws you out of your house. She screamed, making 𝐁𝐬𝐭 flustered, but he didn't stop. As a rope leg shot behind 𝐁𝐬𝐭, Wang whipped around to face Taehyung, her fists clenched. You stay away from me, she hissed, stepping back. Taehyung smirked, pulling her closer. Funny, I was just thinking the same thing about you, Mrs. Soon-to-be Kim. Without thinking, she lunged forward, her hand reaching to grab his collar before she could. His fingers wrapped around her wrist in a firm but controlled grip, stopping her mid-motion. I'm warning you, Taehyung, she spat, glaring at him. I'm not marrying you, stop dreaming. Taehyung tilted his head, a mocking chuckle escaping his lips. Dreaming, he echoed, his tone laced with sarcasm. You think I'm dying to marry you, someone as rude and crazy as you. Please don't flatter yourself. Her glare intensified, but before she could retort, his grip tightened around her wrist. The brief spike of pain made her wince, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Taehyung noticed his mirth faltering as he released her wrist abruptly. Don't make this harder for 𝐁𝐬𝐭. He's already stressed about your safety, you know that. He said, his voice softening slightly but still carrying an edge. Wang clenched her fists, her lips trembling, but she remained silent. Taehyung's eyes darkened, a faint smirk curling his lips. You know, he began stepping closer. I might have found another way to help without going through this marriage nonsense, but now He leaned in slightly, his gaze locking with hers. Now that you have rejected me and called me names, you have bruised my ego. So guess what? I'm going to marry you, and not in a month or two, in a week. Her jaw dropped, her mind scrambling for a response. But before she could gather her thoughts, his hand moved to her arm. His grip was firm but not painful, holding her steady. And if you even think about locking yourself in your room or giving anyone a hard time, I'll make it 3 days instead of a week. He said, his voice dangerously calm. One's lips parted in outrage, but she quickly shut them, her mind working furiously. She wouldn't let him win. No, she would make sure to turn his life into a nightmare if he dared follow through with this madness. Taehyung straightened his grip, still steady on her arm. Now let's go, I'll drop you home. She jerked her arm away, glaring at him as she began walking ahead him, her mind racing with schemes. Fine, let him marry me, she thought. I'll make him regret every second of it. Wedding day. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by Taehyung's frustrated banging on the locked bedroom door. His jaw clenched as he pressed his forehead against the wood, his patience wearing thin. Wine opened the door, he demanded, his voice low and commanding. No response. Wine, he barked, slamming his fist against the door. If you don't open this door right now, you'll regret it. Inside the room, Wine sat cross-legged on the bed, earphones snugly in place, flipping through the pages of her novel with ease. Taehyung's muffled threads barely registered as she hummed along to the playlist, fully absorbed in her book. Outside, Taehyung's patience snapped. He turned on his heel but froze, seeing the staff gathered nervously. His face flushed due to embarrassment. Is it any kind of show here? Get lost. He snapped, his tone icy. Fuming, Taehyung finally retreated to a guest room, slamming the door behind him. His mind burned with thoughts of revenge. She thinks she can disrespect me like this. Fine, she'll learn her lesson tomorrow. The next morning, sunlight poured into the room and Taehyung woke up later than usual. Still seething, he made his way to the bedroom, now unlocked. He stepped inside, his sharp eyes scanning for Wine, only to find her ignoring him completely as she walked past him without so much as a glance. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to calm down, and headed to the bathroom. After freshening up, he wrapped himself in a robe and stepped out, moving to his closet to get dressed, only to find it completely empty. He opened drawer after drawer, yanking doors open with increasing frustration. Not a single piece of clothing was there. Lucia, he growled, running his fingers through his damp hair. Soon the maid appeared with the lower head trembling. Where are my clothes? He muttered through gritted teeth, his patience wearing thin. Madam took them. The elderly woman mumbled timidly, pointing at the window. Taehyung marched to the window and pulled back the curtain. He froze. Outside in the garden, Wine stood with a mischievous smile, tossing what was unmistakably his clothes into the small bonfire. The flames cracked merrily, consuming his wardrobe as she watched with apparent satisfaction. When her eyes met his, she gave him the sweetest, most innocent smile, waving slightly as though greeting an old friend. Taehyung inhaled sharply, his jaw taking as he turned back. He began pacing back and forth, running a hand through his damp hair, and took his phone, calling his assistant to bring him new wardrobe. Half an hour later, Wine sauntered in casually. She froze, seeing Taehyung still there, but soon regained her composure, her expression calm as though she hadn't just incinerated his belongings. Without thinking, Taehyung grabbed her wrist and pulled her close, his grip firm but not painful. His dark eyes bored into hers as he spoke through gritted teeth. Wine, I have limited patience, and if I lose it, I'll forget that you are a woman and my best friend's sister. Wine tilted her chin up, meeting his glare with a mocking smile. Disrespectful, aren't we? She quipped. Something shifted in Taehyung, the proximity between them, the way her breath hissed despite her bravado, stirred something deep within him. He couldn't pinpoint what it was, perhaps the weight of the vows they had exchanged last night or the strange sense of permanence that came with this marriage. Don't mock our relationship in front of the staff file. We are married now. Whether you like it or not, you are stuck with me. At least show some respect to this marriage. He released her wrist. I damn care. Then grabbed her jaw in a tight grip. I'm warning you this last time. Stop with your nonsense. He released her with a jerk, letting out a deep sigh and pointed at her bookshelf. You're crazy about those books, right? I'll burn each of them in front of your eyes and tie you with my tiger backyard. He threatened her. I stared at him for a while and soon her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Then sighed, shaking his head. Damn these tears, he mumbled inwardly and stepped close to her, patting her head before walking out. Few days later, Taehyung's threats and warnings worked and Wine have been behaving well. The one sat cross-legged on the bed, her gaze lowered. Across from her sat Aussie, her face a picture of concern. Come on, Wine, tell me why aren't you talking to 𝐁𝐬𝐿? Aussie asked softly, tilting her head. You haven't even spoken to him since 12 days. And you didn't even want a reception. Why? Wine sighed, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her dress. I'm mad at him, she admitted after a pause. Mad? Aussie leaned forward, her brows furrowing. Wine's voice grew sharper, tinged with frustration. He can't just force me into a marriage, especially knowing how much I dislike that monkey Taehyung. Aussie chuckled, reaching to hold her hand. Correction, my brother is handsome. Wine bit her lips. Yes, handsome monkey, she muttered with a pout. Aussie smiled. Anyways, why do you dislike him so much? Wine hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. Silence hung between them for a moment before she sighed deeply. I always dreamed of marrying someone soft-hearted, caring, and a lovey-dovey man. Someone who would love me insanely and spoil me. Aussie gave her a knowing smile, but Wine continued before she could speak. I wanted a normal life, Aussie. A normal marriage. I'd cook for him, do his chorus, take care of him, go shopping with him without any army of guards following us around. Her gaze grew distant. But him, he's the opposite of that. He's tough, cold, and he hates me. He can't understand me, my feelings. Aussie chuckled softly, squeezing Wine's hand. Taehyung's not the way he seems, Wine, trust me. He may come off as tough, but he's got a good heart. You can do all of that with him, and he doesn't hate you. But I think you do hate him. Wine shook her head firmly, her jaw clenching. If 𝐁𝐬𝐿 hadn't listened to Taehyung's advice, he wouldn't have stepped into this dangerous world. And if it weren't for that, Wilson wouldn't have threatened 𝐁𝐬𝐿 with my life. Aussie's expression softened as Wine's voice cracked. Wilson wiped out our entire family, Aussie. I don't have the courage to lose anyone else. Aussie leaned forward, wrapping her arms around Wine in a comforting hug. You're not going to lose anyone else. Taehyung won't let that happen. Aussie, aren't you scared? Don't you hate this mafia world? I'm bound to Taehyung, and if something happens to him, what will I do? You and 𝐁𝐬𝐿 love and understand each other, but we... She sobbed, unknowns to them. Taehyung stood outside the door, his hand on the handle, frozen. His chest tightened as he listened to every word, the weight of her pain settling heavily on him. He had always thought of Wine as difficult, stubborn, and wild, but hearing her vulnerability stirred something in him. He turned around and walked away. After an hour, he came to the room and found them both in a deep conversation. What's going on here? He asked, his voice light, though his gaze flicked briefly to Wine, lingering for a moment too long. Aussie smiled knowingly. We were just having some girl talk. Wine narrowed her eyes at him, her voice shooting up instantly. What are you doing here? She snapped, crossing her arms, then stepping further into the room. I live here, remember? Or have you already forgotten you're Mrs. Kim now? Wang groaned, throwing a pillow at him which he caught effortlessly. Don't remind me, she muttered, rolling her eyes and standing up. I'll be back in a minute. She scurried out of the room while Taehyung's gaze followed her. What's with your gaze? Aussie teased. Taehyung passed her a questioning gaze. I mean, since the day of the wedding, I have noticed you look at Wine differently. I look at her the way I should look at my wife, but she's just too stubborn and wild. He said with a shrug. Aussie smiled. Taehyung, Wine is really innocent, don't ever hurt her. Try to control your anger. She might be a little stubborn, but trust me, your attention and love can change her. Then smiled faintly, patting her hand. I know she's my wife. I wouldn't hurt her. Wine entered with a set of books. Aussie, you must read these. They are masterpiece. She said excitedly, then stared at her bright smile, his gaze softening as he watched her. Time skipped. Then lounged on the couch, staring at the television screen. His dark eyes flicked up when he heard the sound of heels clicking against the floor. Wine emerged from the hallway dressed in a long coat and boots, her bag slung over her shoulder. Where are you going? Taehyung asked, his deep voice cutting through the quiet. Wine paused, her hand on the doorknob. Shopping, she replied nonchalantly, not meeting his gaze. Taehyung raised an eyebrow and stood. Wait here, he said firmly, disappearing down the hall before she could respond. Moments later he returned, carrying a knitted beanie, a thick scarf and gloves. Wine stared at him, confused. What are you doing? Without answering, Taehyung stepped closer, gently pulling the beanie over her head, tugging a few strands of her hair beneath it. His fingers brushed against her cheeks, then he carefully wrapped the scarf around her neck, his fingers lingering as he adjusted it snugly. Finally, he slipped the gloves onto her hands. It's cold out there, he murmured, his voice soft but commanding. Wine blinked, caught off guard by the sudden gesture. Her eyes traveled to his face, noticing the faint bruises on his cheek and jaw. She frowned, her tone sharp. Did you clash with enemies again? Taehyung straightened, meeting her gaze. For a moment, silence stretched between them as their eyes locked. He nodded slowly, his lips pressed into a thin line. Wine pursed her lips, her gaze dropping to the floor. How does Aussie once stand you two men? She muttered under her breath, but her voice lacked its usual bite. Taehyung's lips curved into a faint smirk as he reached out, gently taking her hand in his. The sudden warmth of his touch made her glance at their joined hands in surprise. Let's go, he said casually. One stared at him, her heart thudding wildly. Where are you going? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Taehyung shrugged, his expression unreadable. Taking my wife shopping, her eyes widened. Without the army of cards. He nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. The realization hit her and she almost squealed in excitement, her face lighting up. I'll finally be able to breathe freely. Taehyung chuckled, the sound low in rage as he tightened his grip on her hand. Let's not make a big deal out of it, he said, though the soft curve of his lips betrayed his amusement. He led her to the door, her excitement palpable as she followed him. For a moment, Wine forgot her usual animosity toward him, her heart fluttering at the unexpected tenderness in his actions. Taehyung glanced at her out of the corner of his eye. You smiled too much, he teased. Wine turned to him, her cheeks flushed, whether from the cold or something else entirely, she wasn't sure. Don't ruin the moment, Taehyung, she shot back, though the smile remained. Taehyung chuckled again, his hand still firmly holding hers as they walked out. At night, the warmth of the heater filled the room as Taehyung stepped out of the washroom, a towel slung over his shoulder. His sharp eyes immediately caught sight of his phone submerged in the water jug on the bedside table. He let out a resigned sigh, his lips quirking up slightly as he glanced towards Wine, who was pretending to read a book, her face set in an exaggerated pout. Though her eyes were glued to the book, he could tell her attention was fully on him. Taehyung shook his head and chuckled to himself. Over the past few days, her antics no longer annoyed him. Instead, they amused him, even softened the edge of his cool demeanor. He walked over to the bed and sat down. Propping himself against the headboard, he snatched her book and tilted his head towards her. Give my book back, she leaned closer, stretching her hand to take the book. How about I take my revenge and dip your book in this jug? Wine gasped, her eyes wide. No, please give it back. Taehyung held her by the waist, making her fall on him, her small frame pressed against him. Then tell me what's with the long face, he asked, his tone gentle. Wine didn't respond, staring down. Taehyung kept away the book and lifted her chin. Wine, I asked you something. Give my book back and leave me. She snapped, moving away his hand and squirming in his hold. Not until you tell me what's bothering you. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Wine hesitated before sighing, dramatically puffing her cheeks. You didn't let me eat ice cream, she muttered, her voice laced with disappointment. Then blinked before letting out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. In this weather, I'd have to carry you to the hospital if you caught a cold. Wine huffed, glaring at him. You're no fun. She got out of his grip and laid on her side of the bed. Maybe, but someone has to keep you in check, he said snugly, pulling her into his arms again. He smirked. I know, a handsome monkey. She looked at him surprised. How do you know? Did you eavesdrop my conversation with Aussie? Wine glared at him, then ran his fingers through his hair. I didn't mean to, she pushed him. Is that why are you acting differently these days? You pity me, she muttered through gritted teeth, then shook his head. Not at all, why would I pity you? I just regret being so hard on you. Wine laid away from him, her back facing him, then sighed and moved close to her, propping on his elbow. Look at me, Wine. She remained silent. He held her face and turned it to him. Don't touch me. She slapped away his hand. You're forcing me to do this. He hovered over her, leaning his face close to her. Hey, wait, what? Then pressed his smile, faking a glare, and cleared her throat. You're disobedient. He glided his fingers from her face to neck. I'll be obedient, I promise. He stared at her for a while and nodded, moving away. Wine silently laid as he pulled her into his arms, her head resting against his chest. Still mad about the ice cream, he teased. She looked up at his face, her eyes narrowing. Stop talking about it. Why does it make you crave it more? Wine groaned, her cheeks flushing. Shut up, Taehyung, she said, annoyed. Then gently trailed his fingers in her hair. You're adorable when you're annoyed. He replied smoothly, his eyes gleaming with mischief. He leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to her temple. Wine froze, her breath catching as her heart raced. Taehyung, she protested weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. He leaned closer, his deep voice murmuring in her ear. Stop sulking over ice cream and sleep. You'll get to your way someday, maybe. The teasing lilt in his tone sent a shiver down her spine. She glared up at him, trying to hide her embarrassment. You're the worst. Am I? He asked, his lips brushing the crown of her head as he tightened his arms around her. Then why aren't you pushing me away? Wine bit her lip, glaring at his smug expression, and muttered, because I'm too tired to fight you. Then chuckled softly, the sound rumbling in his chest. Good, no sleep, he whispered, his voice softening as he closed his eyes. Wine stared at his face and placed her palm on his cheek, then leaned to her touch. She caressed his breasts gently. Then can you not leave all this mafia stuff? He opened his eyes, holding her hand. Sleep, Wine. She pursed her lips. We'll talk about it later. She closed her eyes, snuggling into his chest. Time skip. The aroma of freshly chopped vegetables and simmering sauce filled the kitchen as Wine hummed softly, stirring the pot. She had grown to enjoy these moments of solitude while cooking, finding peace in the simplicity of it. Just as she was about to grab the salt, she heard Taehyung's deep voice call out her name. Wine, he said from behind his stone wall. She turned around, wiping her hands on a towel. Where were you? I thought you... Her words trailed off as her eyes landed on the massive bouquet of flowers in his hands. Taehyung stepped closer, his intense gaze fixed on her, and handed her the bouquet with a small, almost shy smile. I went to get these for you. Wine blinked, her lips curving into a bright smile as she accepted the flowers. They're beautiful, thank you, Taehyung. He tilted his head, his lips quirking into a smirk. Not as beautiful as you. Her cheeks turned a soft shade of pink, and she looked away flustered. You're getting good at this romantic thing. She mumbled. Taehyung took a step closer, his hands gently finding her waist as he leaned in, his face close enough for her to feel his breath. He snipped her hair, planting a soft kiss on the crown of her head. I'm just speaking the truth, he murmured, his voice low and smooth. How could I not when you're standing here looking so perfect? Once, breath hissed and she gently pushed him away, trying to mask her flustered state. Stop distracting me, I need to cook, she said, placing the bouquet aside and turning back to the stove. But Taehyung wasn't one to give up so easily. He stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and leaning down to whisper in her ear. You know you're much more fun to annoy when you blush like that. He teased his tone playful, and elbowed him lightly, trying to suppress a smile. Taehyung, I'm serious, let me work. He chuckled, spinning her around to face him. Work can wait. Before she could protest, he effortlessly lifted her and set her down on the kitchen counter. She gasped, her eyes widening. Taehyung, he smirked, caging her in with his arms on either side of her as he stood between her legs. What, you're the one who said you wanted a romantic, caring man. He teased, leaning closer. I'm just fulfilling the role. Wan narrowed her eyes at him, crossing her arms. You're insufferable. She shot back, though the corner of her lips betrayed a smile. Taehyung chuckled, his deep voice sending a shiver down her spine. And yet, you don't seem to hate me anymore. She raised an eyebrow, playfully glaring at him. Same goes for you. Admit it, you have softened up. He shrugged, leaning closer, until their faces were very inches apart. Maybe or maybe you're just too adorable to stay mad at. Wan rolled her eyes, but her smile grew. You know, beneath the stiff exterior, you're kinda my type, she admitted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. So I guess I'm fine with you. I'm even willing to spend my life with you. Taehyung's eyes softened, a rare warmth taking over his features. He reached up to brush a strand of hair behind her ear. Is that so? Then I guess I'm stuck with you too. Not that I mind, but even if you were unwilling to stay with me, I wouldn't let you go. You hold a piece of my heart. He teased, his smirk returning. Wan's cheeks flushed a deeper shade of pink, and she lightly smacked his chest. You're impossible. And you love it, he said, leaning in to plant a quick kiss on her forehead. She huffed, but her heart raced as she tried to look annoyed. Fine, but only if you let me finish cooking. Taehyung sighed dramatically, stepping back but not before stealing one last kiss on her cheek. Fine, but don't burn anything. I would hate for our romantic lunch to turn into a disaster. Wan shook her head, laughing softly. Go sit down, Taehyung. We have to go to Zevion's place as well. As he walked away, he turned back to look at her, his smirk lingering. I'll be waiting, Mrs. Kim. Her heart skipped a beat at the way he said it, and she bit her lip, turning to the stove with a smile she couldn't suppress. Few days later, Wan sat on the cold bench outside the ICU. Her hands trembled as she wiped her tear-streaked face, her gaze fixed on the closed doors behind which Xavier fought for his life. Hours had passed, yet Taehyung was nowhere to be found. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway. Wan lifted her head, her tear-blurred vision making out the familiar figure approaching her. Taehyung's clothes were splattered with blood, his face hard as stone. Taehyung, she whispered, standing abruptly and rushing to him, her hands instinctively reaching out to touch his arm, her voice trembling. Why are you hurt? What happened? He stopped before her, his dark eyes softening for a brief moment as he held her trembling hands in his. It's not my blood, it's Wilson's. I made sure he'll never hurt anyone again. Wan's breath hissed, her eyes widening in disbelief. What do you mean? Taehyung's grip on her hands tightened slightly as he leaned closer, his voice grew cold. I pulled out his heart with my bare hands. No one touches my people and gets to walk away. Her lips parted in shock as she stared at him, her mind struggling to process his words. His gaze held hers for a moment, longer before it softened, and he asked, How's Xavier and Aussie? Wan choked back a sob, shaking her head. Xavier is still critical. Aussie, she has minor injuries, but her voice broke and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. She had a miscarriage. Taehyung's jaw tightened, and for the first time his steely composure cracked. He pulled Wan into his arms, holding her tightly as his own tears fell silently onto her hair. They stood there for a moment. The sound of approaching footsteps broke their embrace as a doctor came into view. Mrs. Kim, your brother is out of critical condition. He is stable now and should regain consciousness soon. Relief flooded Wayne's face as she clasped her hands together, her tears now a mix of gratitude and exhaustion. Taehyung gave a curt nod, his hand briefly squeezing Wayne's shoulder. They both made their way to Aussie's room. Inside, Aussie lay on the bed, her face pale and eyes anxious. Taehyung sat on one side of her, trying to compose himself, while Wayne sat on the other side, taking her hand gently. "How's Xavier?" Aussie asked, her voice weak but desperate. Wayne forced a reassuring smile. "He's fine now. The doctor said he's stable and will regain consciousness soon." Aussie's shoulders relaxed, but her eyes darted nervously between them. "And my baby?" Wayne bit her lip, her resolve breaking as her tears returned. She shook her head silently, unable to speak, while Taehyung turned his gaze away, his jaw clenched tightly. Aussie's face crumbled as she let out a heart-wrenching sob, her hands trembling as she clenched the bedsheet. Wayne leaned forward, taking Aussie's hand in hers and gently stroking her hair. Taehyung's head bowed as he held Aussie's other hand, his thumb gently tracing circles over her knuckles. They couldn't find the right words to comfort her. Minutes later, Aussie was much calmer but still visibly pale. The silence was broken abruptly when a nurse passed in the room, her face flushed with urgency. "Mrs. Kim, your brother has gained consciousness, but he's refusing to calm down until he sees his wife." Aussie's eyes widened and a desperate need to see her husband overtook her. She clutched Wayne's hand tightly, her voice trembling. "Wayne, go and take care of him. I'm coming with him." Wayne nodded and quickly followed the nurse. She rushed into his room. "Xavier." "Wayne, where is Aussie? How's she?" he asked desperately as she sat beside him. "Aussie is fine, she's coming," she mumbled, holding back her tears, seeing him covered in bandages. He nodded, relief washing over him. "What happened?" After a moment of silence, she spoke. 11 years ago, I had been through the same fear, or maybe worse, when Mom died and Brother Asher had. She choked out a sob. Xavier carried her hair and opened his mouth to speak, but the door opened and Aussie entered, Taehyung's strong arm supporting her. "Aussie," he whispered, his voice hoarse yet filled with relief. Wayne moved aside while Aussie broke free from Taehyung's support and stumbled toward him, collapsing into his arms as she began to cry. "Xavier, we lost our baby." She sobbed into his chest, her hands clutching his hospital gown. Xavier wrapped his arms around her. Wayne and Taehyung stood at the door, giving them a moment of privacy before quietly stepping out. As they exited the room, Taehyung and Wayne saw his parents approaching, their faces filled with worry. "How are they?" Mrs. Kim asked, her eyes scanning their exhausted and disheveled appearances. "They'll be fine. Xavier is awake and Aussie is with him now. They need time to heal." His father nodded solemnly before glancing at both Wayne and Taehyung. "You both look like you have been through hell. Go home and rest. We'll stay here and take care of things." Wayne hesitated, glancing at Taehyung, who gave her a slight nod, his hand resting on her back as they made their way out of the hospital. Back home, the silence was almost deafening. Taehyung headed straight to the bathroom to wash away the blood and grime, while Wayne prepared a first aid kit. When she returned to the bedroom, she found him lying on the bed, his damp hair clinging to his forehead. She sat beside him, opening the kit and gently tending to the cuts and bruises on his arms and hands. "We should have let the nurse examine you," she said softly, her tone more worried than scolding. "I'm fine," he muttered, sitting straight and leaning against the headboard. Wayne sighed but continued her work. Once she finished, she set the box aside and took his hand in hers, her voice even softer now. "Taehyung, you don't have to hold back. You're allowed to feel." She cupped his face gently. His eyes shifted to hers, searching for something in her gaze. After a moment, he pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her shoulder. Wayne froze briefly before wrapping her arms around him, feeling his silent tears soak her shirt, her own tears streaming down her cheeks as she held him. comforting him in the only way she knew how, through quiet, steady presence. "It's all my fault, Wine," Taehyung finally whispered, his voice cracked and filled with guilt. "I shouldn't have dragged 𝐊𝐿𝐿 into this world. Their lives wouldn't have been risked if I hadn't." Wine pulled back slightly, cupping his face and wiping his tears with her thumbs. "No, Taehyung, you didn't drag him into anything. 𝐊𝐿𝐿 wanted revenge for our parents and brother. You know that he was already dragged into this. He just didn't have power. This was his choice, not yours." Taehyung closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. Her words brought him a silver of solace, and he nodded faintly. She smiled softly, brushing his hair back. "Everything will be fine. 𝐊𝐿𝐿 and Aussie will heal." Taehyung opened his eyes, gazing at her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "You're stronger than I could imagine, Wine." She smiled gloomily. "Things are scary until they turn into reality." She went silent for a while and spoke. "Life would have been different if Mom, Dad and Aisha were still alive." Taehyung pulled her onto his lap, holding her face. "Do you miss them?" She nodded as tears rolled down her eyes. "No matter what, I can't move on from it. I was just 12 and it's all still fresh in my mind." He embraced her in a warm hug, caressing her hair. "This is why I don't want you and 𝐊𝐿 still working in this dangerous world. I'm scared for you." "I'm sorry," he whispered, kissing her hair. "I'll find a way out of it." She swiftly pulled out. "Really?" He nodded with a smile. "Yes, but I still need some time. For 𝐊𝐿, it wouldn't be that hard. You'll always find me by your side." He chuckled, wiping her face. "Even if you refuse to be by my side, I'll still drag you." She grinned. "Thank you, Wine, for everything." Wine shook her head, her cheeks flushing. "You don't have to thank me. I'm your wife, Taehyung. This is where I belong." A faint smile curved his lips as he leaned closer, his hand caressing her cheek. "You say that so easily, but you don't realize how much it means to me." His voice dropped, filled with emotion. "I love you, Wine, more than I ever thought I could love anyone." Her breath hitched, her heart racing as his words sank in. "Taehyung." Before she could say anything more, he closed the distance between them, capturing her lips in a tender yet passionate kiss. Her hands slid up to his shoulders, pulling him closer as the warmth of the moment enveloped them. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers, a playful smile tugging at his lips. "I guess you don't hate me anymore." Wine chuckled softly, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. "No, I don't. And for the record, I think I'm falling for you too." His smile widened as he kissed her again, this time deeper and more intense. Time skip. The soft hum of cherry filled the dining room as Wine, Taehyung, 𝐊𝐿, and Aussie and Taehyung's parents sat around the table enjoying a hearty meal. The warmth of family surrounded them, a welcome change from the chaos of the past few weeks. "This is absolutely delicious, Wine," Mrs. Kim complimented, setting her fork down. "Your cooking skills are truly remarkable." 𝐊𝐿 grinned mischievously, leaning back in his chair. "Don't let her fool you. She used to burn toast when we were kids." 𝐊𝐿, Wine glared at her brother, her cheeks flushing as Aussie burst into laughter. "She's come a long way though." Aussie chimed in, winking at Wine. "Maybe you can teach me a thing or two, Wine. Poor 𝐊𝐿's been surviving on my experiment lately." Taehyung chuckled softly, watching them bickering with an amused smile. It was rare to see Wine so carefree, her sharp gaze softening as 𝐊𝐿 teased her. Once the laughter subsided, Taehyung's voice cut through the room, calm yet firm. 𝐊𝐿, I have been thinking about something." 𝐊𝐿 raised a brow, his smile fading lightly. "What is it?" "You won't be working in the mafia anymore." Taehyung said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "What?" 𝐊𝐿 protested, immediately sitting up straight. "Taehyung, you can't." "He's right," Wine interrupted, her voice trembling slightly as she met her brother's gaze. 𝐊𝐿, you almost died. I can't. I won't bear losing you. Not after everything we have been through." Aussie reached over, placing her hand on 𝐊𝐿's arm. "She's right, 𝐊𝐿. Now I understand why Wine hates the mafia so much. I don't want you involved either. We can focus on the coming together, build something safe." Mr. and Mrs. Kim nodded in agreement. "You have given enough, 𝐊𝐿. It's time to prioritize your family and your future." Mr. Kim said. 𝐊𝐿𝐽𝐿 looked around the table, his resolve slowly crumbling under the weight of their love and concern. With a sigh, he nodded. All right, I'll step away. Relief washed over everyone's smiles, breaking across the table. Why's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she whispered, "Thank you." After they resumed eating, Wine stood. "I'll go make some tea. No, you have worked enough today. I'll handle it." Wine hesitated before nodding. Taehyung's parents smiled, pushing back their chairs. "Bring the tea to the garden. The air is lovely tonight." Aussie nodded and walked out, followed by their parents, leaving Wine to gather remaining dishes. "I'll do this," Taehyung said softly, taking the dishes from her hands. Wine nodded with a smile when 𝐊𝐿𝐽𝐿 approached them with a teasing smile. "Wine, I still can't believe you're head over heels for him." Wine froze, her cheeks turning red. 𝐊𝐿𝐽𝐿, keep your voice down. She hissed, glancing towards the door from where Taehyung walked out with a smile. "Why, are you embarrassed?" 𝐊𝐿𝐽𝐿 teased, grinning. She glared at him, but her lips twitched into a small smile. "By the way, he's the same Taehyung you called monster, evil, and monkey." "Shut up." 𝐊𝐿𝐽𝐿 laughed, holding her hands while Taehyung reappeared in the doorway. He paused, leaning against the frame as 𝐊𝐿𝐽𝐿 spoke. "You know, Wine, I promised Asher and Dad that I'll take care of you. But guess what? I was so immersed in revenge things and my own life that I kinda neglected your presence. I'm sorry," he said in a low tone. "I couldn't be Asher. He was just so perfect. I know you used to be stubborn just because you craved the attention and affection Mom and Dad gave you. I'm sorry I realized it too late." Tears welled in Wine's eyes. "You have protected me the way you could save him. Brother is irreplaceable, but so are you. You're my father, my mother, my brother, my whole world. 𝐊𝐿𝐽𝐿, I don't have the courage to lose you, and I'm so sorry for giving you such a hard time. I just love you too much." 𝐊𝐿𝐽𝐿 pulled her into a hug, caressing her hair. "You have always been my stubborn little sister, but I wouldn't have it any other way." Taehyung watched silently, his arms crossed over his chest as a soft smile spread across his face. "Thank you for giving me Taehyung," she mumbled. 𝐊𝐿𝐽𝐿 laughed, rolling out and kissing her forehead. "Take care of her, Taehyung. She's my world." Taehyung nodded. "I will always." With a satisfied smile, 𝐊𝐿𝐽𝐿 walked out of the room, leaving Wine and Taehyung alone. Taehyung leaned casually against the dining table, his dark eyes fixed on Wine. He raised his finger and beckoned her with 2 fingers. "Come here," he murmured, his deep voice low. Wine narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "What's it?" "Just come," he insisted, the teasing glint in his eyes making her heart flutter despite herself. With a sigh, she took a few hesitant steps toward him. As soon as she was within reach, Taehyung wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close and gently cupping her face, wiping her forehead with his thumb. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice laced with curiosity and laughter. Erasing 𝐊𝐿𝐽𝐿's touch, he said with mock seriousness, "No one touches my wife, not even her brother." Wine burst out laughing, playfully sweating his chest. "Taehyung, you're impossible. He's my brother." Taehyung shrugged, unbothered. "Doesn't matter, you're mine." He pulled her further closer, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead before leaning towards her neck, burying his face. "You're ridiculous," she said, though her voice had softened. "And you love it," he teased, kissing her neck and pulling away. Admitted Mrs. Kim. He tilted her chin to meet his gaze. Wine rolled her eyes but smiled, her cheeks flushed. "Fine, I do. Happy?" "Very," he whispered, brushing his lips against hers in a feather-light kiss. Her heart raced as he deepened the kiss, his hand cradling the back of her head, while the other rested firmly on her waist. She melted into him, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Taehyung smirked. "See, I told you. Impossible but irresistible." Wine laughed, her head resting against his chest. "How do you always manage to make me laugh even when I'm trying to be serious?" "Because I know you too well," he said, his voice softening. "And I love seeing you smile, Wine. It's my favorite thing in the world." Her gaze softened as she looked up at him. "You're such a smooth talker, Taehyung." "Only for you," he replied, his thumb tracing circles on her back. Seeing you with 𝐁𝐫𝐿 earlier, it made me realize how lucky I am. You're not just strong, you're the glue holding your family together, and now you're holding our family together. Her throat tightened with emotion as she whispered, I'm just doing my best, Taehyung. And your best is more than enough, he said, kissing her temple. I love you, Wine, more than words can ever express. Her heart swelled and she hugged him tightly. I love you too. They stood like that for a while, lost in each other's warmth. Taehyung pulled back slightly, his lips brushing against her ear as he whispered, I think I deserve a reward for being such an amazing husband. Wine pulled away, raising a brow. And what kind of reward are we talking about? He smirked, his voice dropping. Let's just say it involves you, me, and... Before he could finish, Aussie's voice echoed from outside. Wine, Taehyung, are you two coming or should we start without you? Wine stepped back quickly, her cheeks burning. Coming, she called out, avoiding Taehyung's amused gaze. Taehyung chuckled, brushing his fingers through his hair. Saved by Aussie. Wine playfully glared at him. Saved by me, now let's go before they start asking questions. As they walked out hand in hand, Taehyung leaned down, whispering, This isn't for our Mrs. Kim. Be ready tonight. Wine shook her head, smiling despite herself. With Taehyung there was never a dull moment. Wine sat on the bed, a book balanced in one hand while her other hand held a feeder to her son Dylan's mouth. The little boy lay comfortably in her lap, suckling contentedly, his chubby fingers curling around hers occasionally. God, this man is so amazing. Wine mumbled, completely engrossed in her book, her lips curling into a dreamy smile as her eyes scanned the page. Taehyung, sitting on the couch nearby, looked up from his phone at her words. His brows furrowed slightly and his jaw tightened. He immediately guessed the man she was gnawing over was none other than the protagonist of her book. Jealousy flaked across his features as he stared at her, utterly unaware of the storm brewing in her husband's mind. Unable to tolerate her betrayal, he walked over to the bed and began making silly faces at Dylan, who immediately stopped suckling and giggled, his tiny hands flailing in the air. Taehyung, Wine warned, snapping her gaze to him with a sharp glare. Don't distract him. But Taehyung was far from done. He continued wiggling his fingers and blowing raspberries at Dylan, who burst into peals of laughter, his milk forgotten. Taehyung, Wine scolded, removing the feeder and setting it aside. What is with you today? Taehyung leaned back with a smug grin. How can you sit here drooling over another man in my presence? She blinked at him, confused, before realization dawned on her. Rolling her eyes, she laughed. My God, Taehyung, are you jealous? He's fictional. So, Taehyung shrugged nonchalantly, though the spark of jealousy lingered in his eyes. Doesn't matter, I'm your husband. If you're going to gush about a man, it better be me. Wine couldn't help but laugh louder. You're unbelievable. Taehyung leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low husky tone. Unbelievable. Yet I'm the one who makes you blush and gets you all shy when I do things like... He trailed off, reaching over to brush a strand of hair behind her ear. Flustered, Wine grabbed a pillow and hurled it at him. Shut up. Dylan giggled at the commotion, his tiny hands and legs flailing as he let out a delighted squeak. Taehyung picked up the pillow, tossing it aside as he scooped Dylan into his arms. You're on my side, aren't you, little man? He cooed, nuzzling his son's cheek. Dylan responded with another happy giggle, his small hands reaching for his dad's face. You're teaching him bad habits already. Wine muttered, crossing her arms. Taehyung looked at her with a mischievous grin. And I'll teach him to protect his mom from falling for fictional men too. Stop being ridiculous, she said, though her tone was affectionate. Taehyung said Dylan in his playpen and turned to Wine, a devilish smile playing on his lips. You spend so much time with your books. I feel neglected. Neglected, Wine scoffed. You're spoiled with attention, Taehyung. Don't act like a baby. He closed the distance between them, his arms wrapping around her waist as he pulled her close. Maybe I want to be spoiled more, he murmured, his nose brushing against hers. Wine's heart skipped a beat and she tried to push him away half-heartedly. Dylan is watching. Taehyung glanced at their son, who was busy playing with his stuffed toy. He's busy besides, hearing closer his lips brushing against her ear. I'm your first baby, remember? I laughed despite herself, warmth spreading through her chest. You're so dramatic. And you love it. He teased, finally capturing her lips in a soft kiss. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. You're really something, you know. I try, he whispered, his words tinged with playfulness and sincerity. Before they could say more, Darren let out a loud squeal demanding their attention. Van laughed, turning toward her son. Looks like someone is jealous of his dad now. Sam smiled. Well, he better get used to it. His mom is mine first. Van rolled her eyes but couldn't stop smiling. With him, her days were filled with laughter, love, and just the right amount of chaos.